to the After Freedom podcast, where we unpack the moves behind the movement of a generation dominated by social justice. I'm your host, Robert Mathenjwa, and of course, my co-host, Mbali, is also in the building. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at After Freedom SA. And of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel, ring the notifications bell, and give us a massive thumbs up on this video. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the first part of our 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence special. It was genuinely one of the most enlightening and honestly surprisingly refreshing conversations that I've ever been a part of and listened to in a very long time. So I hope that we're able to continue that energy with the second part of the special with our guest Mbali Shongwe. She's the founder of the Mindful organization, and she holds a degree in sociology and history from the University of Witwatersrand. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. That's peace out from me.
First of all, thanks so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to participate in the discussion. My name is Mbali Shongwe. I'm 22 years old, and I've just finished my first degree at Wits studying sociology and history. But I work in the NGO and nonprofit space. I have a NGO focused on youth mental health and basically just making resources accessible for free. But I've also, over the past 2 years, found myself working in the gender-based violence activism space, following a attack and struggles at the hands of the justice system. I've tried to navigate ways in which we can address the issues that we find in our criminal justice system. And I've been very focused on creating safe spaces and community for survivors in whatever way possible. So I've been working with a focus on police insensitivity and DNA issues. But yeah, that's a bit about me. I think I'm just very socially driven at heart. And I'm just trying to find the small ways as a young person or as somebody who hasn't really cemented my career path, small ways that I can contribute to society in a way that's beneficial and hopefully in a way that warrants change.
Yeah, I think that's actually that's an impressive bio, man. So one side you're doing a whole degree, which you've already achieved, props to you, and then elsewhere you're just busy sorting out the world. I think that's actually pretty impressive, and I think that's something that we can all just take from that. You don't have to be fully cemented in academics or in order for you to prosper and be able to be an activist and all that stuff. So I find it very interesting that you speak and you highlight the fact that you're focused on police insensitivity towards issues of gender-based violence. And this is where I actually want to bring up something that personally shook me when we found out that a week ago, Amanda DuPont very bravely released out a statement. And I think the whole concept of gender-based violence, as atrocious as it is, it's something we're used to now, right? It's not new to hear about a woman who has suffered at the hands of a man that she has been with, and a family member or someone close to her. So you being someone who works in that space with those women, what is the ratio there in terms of how women, sort of the men who interact with these women? Is it usually people who know them or people who they're just meet in the streets?
I'm not sure of the exact statistics, so I definitely won't make a claim, but I know that most sexual assaults and rape cases are people who you know. So majority of the people in this country who are sexually assaulted, it either happens in the home space or by somebody who already had access to them. So a friend, a family member, a colleague, somebody that's close to them is actually not the majority of us that are being attacked in the streets and by random people. I think that we often are taught or sort of socialized to believe that perpetrators and violent people are in the dark alleys and people that we find when you're in the wrong place and doing the wrong thing. But it's so common that these people are the people that we share our space with, people that we trust the most, that take advantage of their proximity to us, their access to us. And so I think that we need to sort of reshape it to understand that these people are people that we know or people that are close to us.
Yeah, And I think when we speak about, so the general focus that we're going to be taking today's episode is I think we already understand how much men affect the situation, right? Given the fact that it's gender-based violence and, usually men are the ones who are perpetrators in this situation. However, I want to speak about how women enable gender-based violence to actually occur. And by this, I don't mean the victims themselves, but I mean the women around them, right? So here we hear Zulu phrases such as "Kyabekezelwa emshadweni, kyabekezelwa emendweni." Here we see things as a girl reporting to her family members that, hey, this family member has sexually assaulted me, and things just being swept under the rug. And to get back to Amanda DuPont, right, she had mentioned that one of the reasons why it was so difficult for her to leave that situation with the Jub is because when she went to the police, that officer, who was a woman, told her to go speak to her partner and then get back and see if this is actually something she wants to do. So essentially, she invalidated Amanda DuPont in the process of her reporting that she's being violated. Right? So that just shows how difficult the situation of gender-based violence is, because it's not just you protecting yourself from men, but it's you trying to facilitate your existence even around women. So how do we navigate that, essentially, just as women? How do we navigate that?
I think that is really heartbreaking, and you're right. There is such a common occurrence of women putting women down, and I think that in my experience or from what I've heard of other people, it generally occurs either in the police system, like when you go to seek out justice. I know in my case, that's where I, for the first time, encountered a woman or a group of women who were trying to invalidate my experience or place blame on me, everything that had happened. But and I know that also happens a lot in the traditional or family space. So if something happens in a community or a family that's very close together, I think that a lot of the time when you do report it to all the people in the community, then that can also be invalidated. In the home space, I think that I've found people either complaining about the lack of support from women in a familial capacity, and also when it comes to the justice system and at the hands of the police. And I think that in that scenario, as difficult as it may be for us as survivors, you do need to continue with what you know is right and what your but in instances when this happens, I think that it's important to sort of assert yourself beyond the support of even the people who are around you. Because it's something that happens so frequently. So if you are going to internalize that and be sort of deterred by that factor, then you'll find even more cases than there already are where people aren't coming forward. And so I think that in these situations, and it's unfortunate that a lot of the time people are not believed, but in situations you have to trust in what happened to you, to you, and be able to stand by that and stand firm in that, even in the face of adversity and in the face of people who don't believe you, because it is so common, unfortunately. And if people are let their stories be devalued or misunderstood or not believed by these people, then we're just going to find even more survivors struggling in silence. And so
I think also what I just want us to unpack here is, how does the trauma that you experience from facing gender-based violence translate on a daily basis, right? From your attitudes to, number one, sex, for example, from your attitudes to that violence that you've experienced, whether physical, emotional, and so on. Because I think what usually happens is that we talk a lot about how, she had a mental breakdown and that's why now she's going to a psychiatrist to get help and assistance, and that's great. Of course, we want to advocate for that. But what are some of the signs and the behavioral patterns, the small behavioral patterns that go on a daily basis that we don't pay attention to, that actually reflect the person's existence as a survivor of gender-based violence?
Yeah, I think that's such a big one, because I think a lot of the time we focus on the incident or what happens, and not really on the journey. But I think that in my case and in a lot of cases that I've heard of, it's actually the after effect that's actually way more prominent than the actual trauma that you experience, just because you carry so much with it. And I know one of the main things that, or a pattern or something that shows up in survivors in the long term is struggling from PTSD, and that will come in varying scales. So a lot of people either are triggered by like either sexual activities, either being in a scenario that is similar to what they experience. It can be a smell, it can be a scent, it can be a sound. Like after years after your assault or days after your assault or any time along this journey, people can be triggered at various points, and that PTSD often expresses itself in overwhelming anxiety, difficulty breathing, like extreme panic, nightmares, flashbacks, all of these things. And I think that that's the most common experience that I hear of being ongoing for survivors, that at any time, under any circumstances, those feelings can be triggered and those emotions can be triggered. I know that there's also that long-lasting impact in terms of sex and sexuality. How do people approach sex following a trauma? And I think that this one is it's so personal. And I think that that's very interesting about the survivor journey, is that there's no people who experience this healing or the aftermath. And I know of people, so like the three most common responses are people become either hypersexual and sort of autonomy over their sexual experiences, and so they will engage in sexual acts, they will be active, and it's all in terms of gaining back your power, gaining back your autonomy, and taking what that person took away from you. Then there's people who become hypersexual, who just are not interested in sexual activity at all. It's too triggering, and they choose to protect themselves by not engaging in any way, shape. And then there's people who are just in the middle, who are sort of apathetic to the situation and will do it or won't do it, and are still navigating it. And I think that those different responses are so interesting. And I also think it's interesting that you can also have a variety of those responses, because I know on my journey, I went from being somebody who was completely hypersexual. I did not want anything, nobody to touch me, no one to, even approach me in that manner. It was so triggering to me. But over time, as you heal, as you address the other factors of your healing journey, and you regain your sense of security and safety, I think then you are able to find within yourself ways to go forward with it in a way that you still feel safe. But I think that there's so many lasting consequences, like you said, like whether it be mental health effects, whether it be impacts on your safety and security. I also know there's people who, following a trauma, are not comfortable in even going about their lives the way they used to, being in public spaces. And so I think it's a variety of adjustments that will happen over time, and that are so specific to each individual. Because I know there's certain things for me that I absolutely cannot do anymore, or certain things that I refuse to be in. But for someone else, that whole framework is completely different. So I think, it is very, it's extremely varied and very complex, but each person does what's the most comfortable and feels the safest for them, I think.
That's really interesting, is that we've only very recently started being aware of how desperately important it is for you to take care of your mental health, right? Regardless of whether you've had a forceful sexual encounter, whether it's physical abuse and whatnot. And I think the reason why this has become so important is because we see the effects of it. And as a society, only now, and not even all of us actually, only now have we collectively come to the understanding that these are some of the effects that such things may result in, such as being a hypersexual individual, right? Whereas previously, and in some communities, so in communities that aren't enlightened about sexual experiences and so on, it becomes an issue of, she's repeatedly engaging in sex, not because of a trauma or because, she has this sort of autonomy over herself, but because she is, and then that's where derogatory terms start to, piling in. Oh, she's this, she's that. Oh, she's loose, she's nasty, she's all of these things that start piling in. And I think it's a very interesting case study when we look at how society perpetuates, in most cases, gender-based violence, but also hinders the victim's progression from that situation that has occurred to them. So what are some of your takebacks from such things?
Yeah. I think that, like, a lot of the time, and what I've found is surrounding sexual assault and abuse often, like, there's so many judgments and opinions placed on the victim and the victim's life post, just like starting right from the attack of like, why was the person in that scenario to begin with? Why did this thing happen? And there's the shame, there's the guilt, there's the blame that happens. And if you are able to overcome all of that, or to find yourself in a space where, at least you have managed to get through that process, then you start living your life and you start trying to rebuild. But people continue to focus on what it is that you're doing and how you're responding to it. And I do think that there's a lot of cases where people who choose to go on with their life, or don't want to be stuck in that scenario, because it's draining to be stuck in what happened to you. A lot of people want to graduate from that experience and move on and be able to live their life separate from that thing, because it's not a defining factor of the individual. It's obviously it's their experience, but it's not who they are. But society sort of has this thing where they want you to carry that with you. Yeah. There's not really room for a separation or for you to move on from that. And so there are so many instances where people choose to assert themselves and continue living their lives, and then are blamed or are judged harshly, especially in terms of sexuality and how they express themselves. I think there's a lot of judgment that's made on the actions that they choose to participate in, because they're like, if you are acting like this, then it's no wonder that this thing happened to you. But I think that entirely, the whole experience or the whole judgment of sexual assault, or women expressing their autonomy or their sexuality after, there's a whole thing of control, in society, and people trying to put pressure on women to act in certain ways, or pressure on people to reach a certain standard, or to reach a certain, category, or to fit into a box. But it's a whole thing of people involving themselves with they really have no room, because I don't think essentially. I think that it's very hard, especially when speaking at it from a sexual trauma viewpoint, because sex and sexuality is something that actually, it's a personal thing. It has nothing to do with you. It's between you and your partner, and that's really where it is. But then when people experience this violence, and something does happen to them, they're forced to take something that was private and make it public. If they choose to, yeah. So, you find yourself in a space where this was something, obviously this is something that's my personal life, but now because of what's happened to me, I've had to go forward. I've had to tell my family about this thing. I now have to report about it. And maybe in my instance, or in people who are similar to me, I've chosen to do something about it and speak about it publicly. So in doing that, I'm speaking to the trauma and I'm speaking to the violence that happened to me, but people take it as I'm speaking about now my sex and sexuality, and they think that they warranted or they should have access to now what happens in my sex life, which is none of their business. Because in me speaking about it, I'm speaking about the crime, I'm speaking about the violence, I'm speaking about what was wrong. And that's where your involvement starts and ends. And beyond that, what I choose to do or how I live my life after is absolutely nobody's business. No one is entitled to make commentary about it, to ask me about it. They can do it, but that's their own thing and that's their business. And I just think that people need to be mature and recognize where your input is not valued, it's not even wanted, no one asked for it. And in judging people for stuff that happens in their private life, there's also something wrong with you. You also reflect what's important to you and why you wanna get into that. But I do think it's important for people to understand the balance between your realm of involvement and not, And I don't think that victims or survivors should then now be penalized because we should have the freedom to speak out. Like, we must be able to speak about it, draw attention to the violence that's occurring or to the societal ill that exists. But people need to be able to have the maturity to speak about that issue separate from the sex and sexuality of the victim or the survivor, because those are two separate things, two different spaces all entirely.
Yeah, I think actually one of the things that is super interesting in terms of just like NGOs as well is how to effectively distribute yourself as an NGO, right? Because I feel like, yes, we still need more NGOs in places like CBDs and, densely populated areas, but places that are very remote, where pretty much nobody knows what's going on there, except for the people who live there. Indawo zeyinkosi, so where the kings are the ones who are ruling, so like kingdoms and so on, and all of these areas. That's the areas where it's very remote and it's literally normalized. Like, it's okay for this thing to happen. So I think I find it very interesting that you're saying that if you don't know that something is a problem, then you're not going to find an issue to it. You're not even going to be looking for assistance, right? So I think, that's a very powerful standpoint to address. I think also something that we can all, okay, maybe not all of us, and I'm going to take quite a controversial turn here, is that as impactful and as, atrocious as gender-based violence is, there are some instances where, because the justice system is not the best, there are so many instances where I've heard of men being wrongfully accused of things such as rape, things such as sexual abuse. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because in the cases where the justice system does try to take, some form of action and these men go to jail, you are now facing consequences of actions that you didn't even commit, right? You're now facing consequences of something that you didn't do. And I think it becomes very important that we look at how do we not only educate people why it's wrong for gender-based violence to exist, but why it's also wrong for you to lie about being abused just to get some sort of benefit from that? Why is it wrong for you to use gender-based violence as a weapon against people who literally who aren't perpetrators? So then, what is your take on that?
I think that whole thing of false accusations and wrongful convictions and things like that, I think it is something that does happen. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's so slim, like it's so narrow, especially in a country with our statistics and our scenario. But I think that in the way to teach and to inform people of the violence and the long-lasting effects of lying on survivors, on the culture, on everything, I think it's again in the education and in the way that it's taught. So I do think that is something that, alongside teaching that violence is wrong and abuse is wrong, it's lying is also wrong, and that has consequences that are long-lasting as well. I think that all of that has to be put together, because I agree, you can't be in a scenario where we are shaming people for doing wrong behavior and for being violent, but then we're allowing people to lie about something of that magnitude. Yeah. Lying about it just as harmful as supporting perpetrators or doing being violent. Lying has such a severe consequence on on the way victims are perceived. So when people lie, it's more than just that moment, because it creates this culture of, you see, women are lying, and so when people do come forward, probably lying. And it's just also there's so many things that happen from that line. Like you said, then there's people who, in our country, I'm not quite sure how many people would actually get behind bars from a lie, just because even in cases where there's ample evidence and a lot of supporting factors for somebody who has actually done the crime. Most people don't go to jail anyway. So we have a very low conviction rate on sexual assault or sexual violence cases anyway. So I'm not quite sure how successful they would be in getting behind. And I think that the impact is more on the community, on the way people view violence. This is also something I've given a lot of thought over the years. I just am like, what is it going to be? Because I'm like, we're in a country where like the threat of legal consequence or like of potentially going to jail, or being taken to task for your actions, that is not enough. It's not doing anything because we already, people in our society already know that we have a flawed justice system. So the likelihood of them getting away with these acts of violence is very high. So I'm saying already, jail is not really a deterrent. Criminals do it over and over again. Like we see the most heinous and violent crimes, and people are not scared of being held accountable for their actions. So I'm like, what is the next step? Like, what's going to make them be more scared? Mm-hmm. The death penalty, I don't know. Personally, like just from a completely like individual like perspective, I don't really believe in like violence in general. And so like I understand the whole notion of a life for a life. Like I feel like you now killed, let's say, 15 people, and then they're gonna kill you. Like, sure, it is a consequence, and it is like the harshest consequence or most severe. But I also feel like it's a cop out. Like then you just get to die, then everything. So in my perfect society or whatever would be like a full life sentence without the possibility of parole, like solitary confinement. You by yourself for the rest of your life to think about what it is that you did. Like I don't think the thing of like you now have killed someone, now you must die. Like I get it, I do get it. I understand the argument for it, and I understand why maybe survivors' families or friends or loved ones would feel as though that is an equal justice, or like an equal consequence for the crime perpetrated. But I don't think that there's enough like suffering really harsh. I need to think about it. I need to live with what they've done. And so I really, that whole thing of maybe having to be in day out and like realize what you've done, I feel like that's more severe because you have to live and face your consequences every day. But in some ways, for me, the death penalty is just like, first of all, I just think killing someone is wrong. So it's just, for me, I don't really get a satisfaction from that thing. But then also, like, you just, okay, then you also get to die, then what happens after that? Like,
there isn't that much consequence.
There's like that much consequence. Well, I do, like, I'm not trying to say that death is not a consequence. It definitely is, but I just don't feel like it does anything for us, or I don't know what the benefit is besides the fact that this person is now removed from society. I think that obviously is the ultimate benefit, but there are ways for that same eventuality without killing the person, in my personal perspective.
So I guess our like standpoint then therefore is just fix the justice system, essentially. Just fix it.
Fix it.
Okay, cool.
For people to be like, people must just be scared that if they do something will happen. But the fact that like less than 10% of sexual violence cases, I think it's either between either 10%, less than 10%, or less than 15%.
It's approximately 10. Yeah.
So I'm like, that's crazy. If we have the high statistics and then only 10% of people are making it to the courthouse, then clearly something is really, really wrong. Something very wrong.
Also because making it to the courthouse doesn't mean that a person is actually going to go to jail. It just means they were in court. Yeah.
They were in court. And so many people, like I know in my life, maybe out of my friends, and a friend group of 10 of us, there's only 3 people who haven't been assaulted ever, like on a violent level. And out of those, then there's maybe three of us who reported it because already there's disbelief or distrust in the system. So people aren't going to report anyways. And then out of the three of us, all of us with ample evidence, none of it made it to court. None of us have made it based on such strong evidence. So I'm just like, how many people have fallen through the cracks? Even the statistics that we have on gender-based violence, I'm sure that they are doubled or tripled in our country because there's so many people who aren't going to report it, aren't going to go or even tell anyone that this happened to them. Like there's so many pitfalls of the system. So it's a complete revamp of the justice system. I think would do so much good, and of just policing in general, because we also have a big problem with policing, and even police being perpetrators of these crimes is something that we see frequently as well. So there's just a lot that needs to be done. A lot.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. I think this is where we're going to cap it for today. Thank you so much for your perspective and your insight, Mbali. I really enjoyed this discussion. And thank you for being on this episode of the After Freedom podcast. Is there any last thing you would like to say before we,
end it?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for having me and also for facilitating a space for this discussion. Because I think that, like we said, these things are happening all the time. And a lot of the silencing or the lack of change is the fact that we're not willing to sit down and discuss it and to share our perspectives and to contribute ideas into how things can change. So thank you for facilitating that space and opening safe space for that discussion as well. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Mbali. Bye.
Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our two-part special episode dedicated to 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Now, I hope all of you can ponder on everything that we've heard today, and this was a truly enlightening experience for you. I know it was for me. And of course, we're going to be linking the social media accounts for each of our guests on our show notes and the description. So please make sure to give them a follow, and of course, check them out as well. Don't forget to follow us at After Freedom SA on all social media platforms. You can follow Nam at u.nam.m. You can follow me at Rob Mathenjwa on Instagram, and of course subscribe to the YouTube channel, give us a massive thumbs up and ring that notifications bell. Now that's it from me, and we'll see you guys in January. Goodbye.